Hey everybody, welcome to another Transport Evolved live stream. It's about time that we have one of these, and we do try and get as many people as we possibly can involved and engaged, and I hope that you guys have lots of questions and lots of tips that you want to send our way today during the show. And of course, if you want to tip us during the show, just hit that dollar bill sign at the bottom, send us a chat, a super chat, and we can read out any questions that we have direct live on air. Today, we decided to hold this particular live stream because of not an issue per se, but a change in policy that's just happened to Tesla. And that is specifically that Tesla is ditching the use of radar in all of its cars. Well, in its Model 3 and Model Y, but I think eventually all of its cars, and focusing specifically on just using vision systems, computer vision systems and cameras, basically. And I have a great guest to join us today. But first, of course, we've got the wonderful Winter, who has joined us as the token Tesla owner of the Transport Evolved universe. Hey, Winter, how are you?
I'm all right. I have super mixed feelings about this announcement. There's a part of me that thinks this could be really awesome, and there's a part of me that's a little not entirely sure about it.
Yeah, okay. And I think I've probably fit in the same space. Now, one of the things that we always have aimed in our direction, I think very fairly, is that, well, you don't own a Tesla, so you can't talk about it, obviously aimed at me, which is why you're on right now, or also because you're just lovely to have on the show. But also that we are not engineers. We are not experts in the field of autonomous driving. So you know what we've got today? We've got our own tame expert in the world of autonomous vehicles. And I'd like to introduce you to Adam Szabeya. He is the CTO of Metrolla, which is a company that facilitates automation from machine vision. And it works to enable engineering teams to access raw live data without interfering in all of the nuts and bolts, while also allowing smart sensor technology to have network connections.
Yep.
You specialize in smart city access management and edge robotics industries, but one of the things that you really focus on is Lidar technology.
Correct.
And of course, when you're working with Lidar, Adam, you also have to work with sort of camera vision and also radar-based systems as well. So tell us a little bit more about Metrolla and where you guys fit in, because you're not going to be something that you're not selling technology to customers for their own vehicles, are you?
No, this is direct to manufacturer, direct to infrastructure. So we are a B2B company. My background actually is in building autonomous vehicles. The earliest work that I did was building out the Lidar infrastructure for a major semi-truck manufacturer and facilitating how they're going to access that data once it goes full scale. Metrolla, as you kind of mentioned it, we facilitate the sensors directly, and we also enable automation from the machine vision. So different events can happen that aren't critical to the driving capabilities of the vehicles, but more critical towards the data capture and understanding of the environments these vehicles are in.
Cool. And so you have some, I suppose, some preconceptions about the various systems on the market. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but obviously as somebody who works in the Lidar industry, you've always been a proponent of Lidar. Maybe you can talk to us about that and your experience of using Lidar versus the other sensor systems.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So I think a better way to think about my proponency towards Lidar and other technologies is that to understand really how machine vision works in a holistic manner. So let's talk about like the elephant in the room that's been here for, since Tesla's been around, and that is cameras, right? So like every type of sensor has their pluses and their minuses. Cameras, specifically depth cameras. Sorry, I'm getting all backwards here. Specifically depth cameras. Depth cameras, they have two different camera systems on them. One is a long range camera and one is a ultra wide to get an understanding. And they combine those two together to create depth of field. Now, if you are trying to understand why people might have two eyes, that's actually one of the reasons for it. So if you are wanting to test this out yourself, look at something far away and close one of your eyes and the entire thing will feel flat, right? We have two eyes to create that depth of field, but we still can't get a certain estimation of how far something is or the exact shape and dimensions of an item as we need to traverse around it. And that is kind of where additional sensors kind of fall into play. So you have radar now, and radar can get you a really good example of where something is in space and time. And it's really good for super long range, for understanding something that might be coming towards you. An infamous example is that Tesla that crashed into the back of a semi-truck that was overturned. That could very well have been a miscalculation of the speed in which something was approaching and the ability to observe an item in the space that it was in, which is why a lot of the professionals say, including myself, sensor fusion is the only way to achieve true full self-driving. And we're talking different levels. There's L1 to L4, and L4 is the driverless. The driver doesn't have to do anything. There's no steering wheel. It just does everything for you, point A to point B. And there's only a few companies that have actually been able to reach that. And one of the reasons why I think Tesla has gone the direction of using only cameras is because cameras can see much farther than LiDAR sensors can. I think the farthest LiDAR sensor I've been able to come across so far goes about 200 meters. And let's say that you're going quick, right? The biggest problem is I want to go at freeway speeds. Right? How fast does your decision making need to be in your entire ecosystem of machines that are making decisions for that sensor to matter, right? So at 150 meters, which is the standard class of LiDAR sensor, you're gonna have about 80 feet per second at 60 miles per hour, which gives you a rough decision-making time of 3 seconds before you hit the item.
Which isn't long.
Which isn't long. It isn't long at all, which is why cameras have been the biggest proponent here for Tesla, because there's this concept called frame slicing. So if you have 30 frames per second on a camera system, you can measure the distance between one and another item by comparing the differences between the first frame and the next frame. And that is what Elon Musk has been proposing for his product the whole time. But this has obvious downsides. The downsides being cameras don't necessarily function as well in fog and rain, whereas LiDAR sensors can see through the fog and can see through the rain. We were talking, I think Winter earlier mentioned prior to our meeting here that radar can have issues with storms. So it doesn't function so well with storms. So you couldn't just rely exclusively on radar. You can't just rely exclusively on camera systems. And you can't just use any old camera system because you get lens distortion, and lens distortion will then offset, okay, how far away is something actually if you're just doing that. And so I think it's a very dangerous thing to say. We're only going to use one. You know, if this was an airplane, for example, there would be triple redundancy in all of the sensors. And I think if you are giving up full control of your vehicle, you should have more than one sensor giving feedback to understand your environment a lot better. That's my personal take from a professional stance.
So before I hand over to Winter, I just want to throw in two things to clarify here, because otherwise I know people will come in and ask. Unless I am very much mistaken, and feel free to correct me, the crash that happened in with regard to the overturned truck that the Tesla slammed into the back of, unless I'm very much mistaken, I don't believe the final accident report has been issued on that yet. So while autopilot is suspected, I don't think it's been confirmed or ruled out.
I also, if I may, I also want to say that that's a good illustration of why sensors are useful, but I am not advocating that that's the reason why that happened. Cool. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second thing is we did try and find someone from Tesla to join us, but obviously all of the people that I reached out to or tried to reach out to on LinkedIn, then none of them received messages. So I don't know if that's Tesla's policy, if that's just the people who are who we're working with. And we also tried to get some artificial intelligence machine learning people on, but because we were trying to get this together in a short order, we weren't able to do that. Hopefully we can do that in the future. Winter, do you want to go back to the top and explain kind of the crux of the story, and then we can kind of walk through the story from there?
Sure. So up until now, Tesla's autopilot and what they call FSD, or full self-driving. To clarify, autopilot is essentially Tesla's combination auto steer and adaptive cruise control system, whereas what they call full self-driving is a much higher level of autonomy, which is still in beta form, although people who've purchased access to full self-driving do have more features available to them now than people like me who just have autopilot. So anyway, up until now, those systems have used a combination of 8 cameras, 12 ultrasonic sensors, and a forward-facing radar system to build the car's picture of the world around it. What Tesla's announced is that it will no longer be using the radars on new Model 3 and Model Y cars. It's not entirely clear to me from the research I was able to do today whether existing cars that have radar units will stop utilizing the input from those units. I suspect that is what's going to happen, since Elon Musk has said that the newest version of full self-driving, which is coming, full self-driving version 9, will be vision-based only, will not use any radar input. So if that gets installed on older cars, I assume they'll just be disregarding the radar system. I would imagine the same is happening with autopilot. This isn't entirely out of the blue. Tesla, in their Q1 report, said that they believed that a vision and AI-based autopilot and autonomy system was the way to go. One of the things that Elon Musk specifically noted on Twitter is that the expectation, although I'm a little dubious about it, is that dropping the radar system will lead to much less in the way of phantom braking experiences. It's not uncommon when you're using autopilot. And I found this with other cars, adaptive cruise I've used over the years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Including the BMW i3, which was a camera-only based adaptive cruise system, that you can be driving along and all of a sudden the car will slam on the brakes because it has decided something's there. Very famously with radar systems, if a chip bag blows across the road, because that's Mylar, it has a really high degree of return, and that can cause really dramatic emergency braking. But I've looked... times when I've had phantom braking, oftentimes there's nothing I can see that caused it. It just, the system said, ah! And supposedly going to a camera-only system will reduce incident phantom braking. What Elon Musk has been saying is that one of the challenges for Tesla has been that the camera systems and the radar systems don't always agree on what they see. And as a consequence, that causes issues for the autopilot system, and that the plan is, by removing radar from the equation, that reduces these moments of conflicts between the systems.
The ghosts in the shell, effectively, is what he's talking about.
But, I mean, as an aviation nerd, I'm kind of with Adam, that there's a part of me that really likes the idea of multiple systems working in different ways to build a more complete picture of reality. Now, on the LiDAR front, there have been recent photos shown in social media of Teslas with LiDAR systems mounted to the roof, which is, I don't know if it's assumed or actually stated by Tesla, was them using LiDAR to try and validate their camera data, trying to ensure that the picture the cameras are building is as good as a LiDAR system. But I don't have any more detail on that. It's just a thing that we've seen.
So
this would
go on.
When being able to reach out to Tesla's press office would be absolutely fantastic.
It would be, but Tesla doesn't have one anymore.
Yeah.
Take it away, Adam.
I was going to say okay. So, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, my company runs a Clubhouse talk on Lidar 101, and we have people come in on a regular basis to talk about Tesla's LiDAR camera and all that other fun stuff. So very wide range. It's not slamming on Teslas. It's not one thing or another. It's really a holistic learning experience for everybody involved. but that has been a really big point of contention for Tesla in the past. And for everybody in the chat and anyone who's chiming in after the fact, I actually like Teslas. I don't think they're terrible. I think that it's not my styling preference. I like the Hyundai Kona EV, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the F-150 Lightning plays out. But from a technology standpoint, I know that the LiDAR sensors that they are using, I'm still actually waiting on my version of their testing. My company is partnered with Luminar, Velodyne, Ouster, and Hesai LiDAR to facilitate all of their LiDAR sensors. And I know that that's a really expensive LiDAR sensor they have on there, and they have multiples on them. And I know that they're really hard to get. So to say that they're validating it, I think is a really high ask. I don't think they're just validating it. I think that they're building some other process around it. And when I say that, I mean, like, I'm not allowed to say the actual cost of these lit sensors, but I can tell you that they're 5 figures.
Yeah.
They're really expensive sensors.
And when you're working in a pre-production environment, they are super expensive because often those products are then customized by the manufacturer for the OEM later down the line, right?
They're usually in the format that they sit. They just get put in a different housing.
Right. I mean, my understanding was that they were using the LiDAR data to try to validate that the cameras are as good as LiDAR. I don't imagine Tesla's going to mount LiDAR in any production vehicles.
No, I imagine that wouldn't be the case either. But if you're, I'm trying to figure out how I can say this without actually saying it. So if you have 4 of those devices on there, right, and you've dropped more than $80,000 for your sensors, you're in it for more than just validating camera systems. Those are directional sensors. They're not spinning sensors, so they're more akin to that. But I can tell you that for a low cost option that currently that is future marketing, Velodyne has a $100 LiDAR sensor that goes 150 meters. They don't need to spend more than $80,000 to validate their cameras work fine, unless they're doing more. And that's my personal professional opinion about that. But at the same time, Elon Musk has very much said that that LiDAR is a crutch, and he feels like there's a way to do it cheaper. And I don't want to keep going down that path.
Right.
But yeah, it's an interesting place for them right now.
So let's jump in with the LiDAR, because Elon Musk said, at the time, LiDAR's a crutch. He didn't believe it was very good. People in the chat room are saying LiDAR is a fool's errand. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about LiDAR. And I think now would be a really good time to dive in and talk about this as it pertains to Nissan, because a couple of years ago, when Nissan launched its ProPilot software, there was a quote, something was misquoted from one of Nissan's chief engineers about LiDAR, saying, and the news was reporting it as saying, oh, Nissan agrees with Tesla, LiDAR is rubbish. And the actual context of what was said, to paraphrase it, was, right now, LiDAR sensor technology is not as advanced as it needs to be in order to be used in an automotive application for the reasons you just listed off earlier: distance, the distance issues, the speed issues, and the responsiveness issues.
Mm-hmm.
And Nissan's chief engineers had basically gone, we're not saying no to LiDAR in the future, because we know that these generational technologies are improving incredibly quickly.
Oh, yeah.
We're just saying no to it right now in production vehicles. And that's a very different thing. And I think we are now, the generational leaps and bounds that we're seeing in LiDAR technology is truly mind-blowing. I remember seeing, first, second, third generation LiDARs at CES a few years ago, and now we're orders of magnitude further down the line, especially with a lot of the big companies that are, throwing out constantly changing lidars. You think about the lidar that we used to see on top of the Google self-driving Prius, right, with a spinning ball. Now we've got lidars that are small enough. I mean, Velodyne has one that's kind of smaller than my camera here. It's tiny, isn't it?
That's the Velobit.
Are any automakers currently producing production vehicles that use LiDAR?
I believe so. I believe Audi has some front-facing LiDAR sensors in their newer vehicles.
Let's actually talk about what we've got. So I know that Super Cruise has LiDAR in it as well. GM is using Super Cruise with LiDAR, radar, GPS, and vision, right? So that's what you were talking about earlier, Adam. That's the sensor fusion.
It's a really important key thing that'll come up, I'm sure, multiple times as you get into any conversations with professionals. That sensor fusion. I'm not saying, and it really should be put here, I'm not saying that LiDAR is the end-all be-all. I'm not saying that cameras are the end-all be-all. I'm saying that it's going to very likely end up that sensor fusion is going to be the answer to everything.
If I may, somebody in the chat room has said multiple times, I think a couple of people have said it multiple times, if we can drive using just vision, why can't AI? And I think the only anecdotal experience I have of this, and please feel free to jump in, is my late sister Susan was profoundly deaf. She went deaf when she was 5 or 6, and all she could really hear by the time she died was, very, very certain frequencies. She drove. She passed her driving test when she was in her late teens. She drove, up until the point she could no longer physically move. She was still driving. So she drove her entire adult life as a deaf person. And the only thing that I would note that was different between her driving and me driving was that driving took it out of her, because she didn't have any other sense to rely on when she was driving other than her vision and physical feeling of the car. And when you take away your hearing, suddenly the process of driving is a lot harder, because you can't hear traffic beside you. You can't rely on those signals, whether it's the emergency vehicle coming past or anything like that. And I would suggest that maybe there's more to driving than we think, that we don't think about as humans, especially if we are able-bodied. Being able to hear is part of that driving experience. And I don't know if that's something that you would buy into.
I actually agree with that. But I think it's also really more than that. I started my career as a mechanic. Believe it or not, I did 5 years. I worked on Audis and I worked on Hondas for dealership networks. And there's a bunch of different sensors on these vehicles that provide different feedback. And I wanted to kind of like talk about this from a technical perspective, not just a humanistic perspective. When you're driving on the road, you can make meaning of what a red light means. You can make meaning of what the lines on the road mean. You can make meaning of what the subtle things that somebody's doing in the lane up ahead of you, and you can understand that in about 30 seconds they're going to merge into your lane. So you can make a completely different decision. And the one thing about machine learning processes in AI is it requires a substantial amount of data and a substantial amount of training to get somebody who even just has 100 hours on the road to understand. And so the efforts that are going into these autonomous vehicle processes, they're taking, the wheel speed sensors, they're taking the engine input, they're taking these LiDAR sensors and these radars and camera systems, and they're all putting it together and feeding it through a process that is trying to make meaning of the roads, the road signs, the road lines, the colors on the back of the car in front of them. But they don't really even have like an understanding yet of, okay, someone did a weird like swivel in the road. How do I react to that? What does that mean? It doesn't know these things that we all know intrinsically, that never think about. And that just takes a substantial amount of time. I predicted about 4 years ago that we'd have full self-driving in about 5 years, which is why I started down the efforts of my business. And I don't think it's going to come to people in 5 years. I think it's going to be a B2B, like big fleets of vehicles in very specific isolated spaces, in specific defined routes because of those reasons. They have to train up what that actually means, whereas we can be put in any environment and just know because we are intrinsically faster learners than machine learning processes are. Sorry, Winter, go ahead, sorry.
So, I mean, I sort of feel like Nikki's point about her sister does really, in many ways, reinforce what Tesla's saying, in that, like, I've driven with plenty of deaf people who are very good drivers. I mean, while I don't like the lack of redundancy, Tesla has said that they want to be a artificial intelligence company, not just a car company. That they see one of their, I think was it on the Q1 earnings call? There was a thing about how it was when Tesla looks at its sort of profit and business model moving forward, that being an artificial intelligence company is really important to that. So, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks they wouldn't be doing this if they weren't really confident in it. At the same time, I'm very conscious that there's a chip shortage and that Bosch and other manufacturers of radar systems haven't been able to deliver those radar systems. We're seeing that with other manufacturers. BMW is having difficulty, from what I understand, acquiring radar systems for adaptive cruise control for both their automobiles and the motorbikes, because now we're starting to see adaptive cruise in motorbikes. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that. So, I mean, Tesla argues that they have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of data from all the people who've been using our autopilot all along. I think the thing that to me as an owner, I would love to see autopilot get better. It's good, it's very good. Sometimes it's really frustrating. And along with the announcement of the rollout of FSD Beta 9, Musk also mentioned that the idea of FSD subscription is coming, which is something that I would love to have happen before I have to drive from Maine to Oregon in my Model 3. Because I'd love to just subscribe for a month, because workload reducers are fun. At the same time, I'll admit, it really bothers the hell out of me that the Model S and Model X are keeping their radars. And Tesla's statement about that was not reassuring to me as a Model 3 owner. And I saw other Model 3 and Model Y owners saying, like, are you basically saying that we're going to be beta testing this and you don't want your top level owners,
right,
owners of your $100,000 cars being beta testers, but you're all right with us doing it? And that makes me a little leery. Additionally, some of the basic functions are not available in these cars as they're coming out. Tesla has said that autopilot will be limited to 75 miles an hour. Smart summon may not be available for people who have smart summon, who pay for FSD and have smart summon, and that those will be fixed in over-the-air software updates. And that's the thing that makes me nervous, because that says to me this isn't 100% ready to go, which makes me think that it's as much about not being able to get radar units as it is about Tesla truly believing that the future of autopilot and full self-driving and vehicle autonomy is in neural networked cameras and cameras alone. It has not been handled fantastically, to be honest.
Well, again, if Tesla had a press department, it would be so much easier for us to have this conversation.
I did have to Elon Musk's tweets to get some information for this live stream. There were things that I wanted more info on. People kept saying, like, oh, Tesla has said X, Y, and Z. And then when I asked, like, okay, where do I find that from Tesla? What they meant was Elon Musk tweeted about it. Here's the tweet, which is very useful to be able to get that information. But I do perpetually feel like I have to take everything Elon Musk says on Twitter with a grain of salt compared to the official release from Tesla about Tesla Vision, which was not as comprehensive a release as I could have wished. It was very useful. There
are some challenges here, right? Because I don't think Tesla's making its own cameras. I'm pretty sure that Tesla is using an OEM supplier for cameras. I know I presume it was using an OEM for radar, but it is making its own SoC for autonomous driving. You know, it's got its own chip division. It's making its own chips, which of course has helped it avoid some of the challenges of the chip shortage. I think some of the issues there kind of have helped. The thing that worries me most about all of this is the speed at which all of this change is occurring. And that makes it very hard for legislators and also for anybody kind of working in adjacent industries to keep up. And some people will say, well, that's the price of progress. But other people will say, no, I mean, look, these systems are constantly being reiterated. The machine learning is developing new algorithms all the time. It's informing Tesla's design decisions. It's informing Tesla's chip decisions and its fab process. But I think at the same time, I think legislators are going to have something to say about this, right, Adam? I mean, I'm not.
Yeah. So this is kind of why. And sorry, Winter, I didn't mean to cut you there out. This is why I think it's going to take a really long time for it to get into the hands of the masses, and why it's going to come to businesses first. And that is, legislation ultimately drives whether or not things are going to be allowed on the road. They're going to probably require, and this is just a shot in the dark here, but they're going to probably require a standardization for data protocols and other systems that live on these vehicles, so that they can approach the data in the same way when they require that data to be accessed. So like current vehicles right now, they have freeze frame data in their ECUs. They're running on OBD2 as a standard for getting the diagnostic information off of these things. And I imagine there's going to be a push from legislature to save data in a specific way, make sure the vehicles are formatted, set up in a specific way so that they can be consistently managed for the masses. And there's going to be a lot of lobbying that'll happen in order to get them to be on the road sooner than later. And you're seeing this actually take place in a lot of the cities that are pilot cities. San Francisco is giving out explicit licenses for autonomy. Arizona is doing the same thing. So we're starting to see the beginning of that. But to get it everywhere, that's going to be, I think, a longer story.
See, unless I'm mistaken, SAE doesn't exist yet for it's got the levels of autonomy for SAE, but they haven't actually just kind of set a protocol yet, have they? For
not that I'm aware of.
See, I think that there's really two very different conversations here. There's the conversation of very high-end driver assist and autonomy features for a driver, and there's the question of robo-taxis. And I think that if we're talking about cars going around without anyone sitting behind the wheel, I can totally see there's going to be legislation involved there. I don't believe that legislatures are going to get involved in any autonomous system that still requires someone to be seated behind the wheel, because frankly, we've had adaptive cruise control since the 90s. And as far as I know, the government doesn't have anything to say about how adaptive cruise control works. We've had lane keep assist since the early aughts. We've had lane centering since at least around 2006. And the government doesn't care about any of that. I mean, you know, the way adaptive cruise worked on my i3 and the way it works on my Tesla are very different from in some ways from the driver's perspective. And who knows, maybe I'll change some as the Tesla gets rid of its radar. But like, you know, the lane centering system on our old Kona electric didn't work the same way as lane centering with autopilot. And certainly we technically have lane departure avoidance in our Bolt. Like our Bolt is supposedly will hold its own lane, but the way that's implemented is laughably terrible. The Bolt, like if you drift more than halfway across the line, it'll steer you back. But by that point, you're halfway across the line. Right. And they all get to be called the same thing. And there's no regulator stepping in and saying, wait a minute, you really can't have your system work like that and still get to call it that. So I think that Tesla could say tomorrow, this car will drive itself. Because Musk is saying that
right.
it's the implementation of camera only, where he claims that we are, literally weeks away from FSD 9 being very good and going to widespread release in the not so distant future. And I think that as long as they say you have to have a driver behind the wheel above 5 miles an hour, because I don't know what the speed on Smart Summon is. It's a feature that boggles my mind why it exists. I think that the government is going to say we want nothing to do with this.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's important to note that there's a human element when it comes to the government. As long as a person is behind the wheel, as long as a person has control of the vehicle, I think is a really more key part. The government really doesn't care so much. The classification of, I believe it's L3, is when a person can have their hands off the wheel. And an L4 is when the wheel's removed completely. So those are the biggest hurdles. And the only company that I'm aware of at this point, and I probably am speaking out of turn here, is Waymo, which has done L4 successfully. Other companies have said they've done it, but they still have wheels in the car. And so like the standard around it is, and even then they can't go above a specific speed, and they are only limited to specific locations.
Yeah, they're geofenced.
They're geofenced. They have only one place they can be. They can't go above 35 miles per hour. It's a very controlled environment. And I just don't see that. I just don't see that being a reality for most of the world until government steps in and says something about it. And they're not going to do that as long as people control their own vehicle. So when we're talking about like when I hear full self-driving, I know FSD is like the marketing term for it for Tesla, but when I hear full self-driving, I'm thinking L4 autonomy.
Right. I know people who have bought Teslas specifically because they believe that they will be able to rent them out as robo-taxis in the very near future. And I think if you're making financial decisions based on that, I think you're making a terrible mistake. I'm not an expert in this field like you are, Adam. I'm not willing to say like, no, Teslas won't be operating without drivers anytime soon. Maybe they will. I mean, it would be interesting to see, but I think people I know say, yes, I bought a $50,000 or $60,000 car, but it's going to help pay itself off because I'll be able to rent it as a robo-taxi very soon. I think that's really problematic. And I do think that although Tesla doesn't advertise, I think it's safe to say that Tesla marketing, at least in the form of Elon Musk's Twitter feed, has given people reason to believe that like full robo-taxi functionality where while you're at work, your car could drive off on its own and pick someone up and take them where they're going. And then when it's done, come back to where come back and park itself at work. I think
that's a terrifying thought.
People absolutely feel that, believe, and some people are making purchase decisions with the idea that is on the horizon, certainly within the year. But other people I've talked to other Tesla owners, people who've had Teslas since the early Model S's and have owned a variety of Teslas, who say like, look, if you listen to Elon, full self-driving and full autonomy is always a few months away. And it's been a few months away for a
long time.
I mean, one of the reasons we bought our car was because it's so good to drive. The autonomy functions, autopilot is nice. It's fantastic. It's that much more fantastic than adaptive cruise and lane centering as an Arcona.
So can I chime in on something that you just mentioned there? That is the only reason you should buy a car. I'm gonna echo something from Marcus Brownlee, MKBHD on YouTube. Super awesome. If you don't know who he is, you've been living under a rock. He is he's quoted as saying you should never buy something based off of a future feature. Never buy into something based off of the promise of a future feature, because they might never come. You never know. But in my opinion, just from being a mechanic like in the car world, working in this industry, having my own opinions about full self-driving, the only reason you should buy a car is because you love driving that car. I don't like I said, I don't mind Teslas. I probably won't buy one for my own reasons. I don't really, not styling of it is my favorite, but but I will drive a car. I will buy a car because I love to drive that car. And it's really ironic that I'm working in this space because I drive a full manual ICE car, and I know that's a gasp moment for this channel, but I really like driving my car.
Not just a gas car, a 30th anniversary Miata, which is absolutely stunning. By the way, the color of your car is stunning.
I love it so much.
I think most of us were manual drivers.
Yes, we all were, apart from Aaron, I think.
Yeah, we were all
Aaron and Kit.
I'm actually planning on putting some money down on the F-150 Lightning to replace my Suzuki.
Join the crew. Join the queue. A couple of things I just want to throw in for housekeeping, because people have been saying here. Okay, someone said that Lidar is not included in Super Cruise. That is different to what my information is, but I stand to be corrected if that is if that is in fact true. A couple of people been asking about why is Winter sounding British when he sounded American last month? When he made a video last month for the channel, he sounded American. Now he sounds British. Winter made a really amazing video about it on Transport Evolved Take 2. We will link to it below in the show notes after we've gone live. It explains why he did sound American and now he sounds British. And at some point in the future, he will sound American again. One other thing that I was going to just touch base on here, and that is the discussion of, at the end of the day, we have to decide whether, what's acceptable for autonomous vehicles. And that takes us into kind of all down a deep, deep rabbit hole about metaphysics, and are we okay with a car killing someone if it's an autonomous vehicle, versus do we expect autonomous vehicles to behave better than humans? And some people would go, well, yes, autonomous vehicles are safer than humans. The data proves that. And then, all of those other things that go down. Jumping back to radar, I think one of the things we haven't really kind of emphasized is the thing that radar is really good at, Adam. And maybe it'd be good to reiterate what each of the sensor systems are best at doing, because we've kind of talked about what they're not so good at doing. So obviously, maybe we can run that down.
So there's where do I even start here? There's a bunch of things that I could talk about. I'll start with my wheelhouse, which is Lidar. Lidar is really good at range. It's in the name of itself. So light range detecting. So it can basically get the range of something. It can outline objects. It can kind of discern a better depth than depth cameras would be able to. It's where it's not so great, and we've had discussions of this about in our Clubhouse talks, is that it can't really discern color. And color is kind of important in our world. And that's where cameras really, really are good. You can get the color of the road signs, you can get the color of the street lines, the tail lights that are flashing. And then if we go into radar has much longer range than Lidar can. And it's also very good at detecting objects in space and time. So you can send a radar scan out and understand pretty much where everything is in much farther before your Lidar sensor can even detect it, right? So that's kind of where the holistic playing field works when it comes to all of these sensors that we're going to be talking about. That's very, very high level. I could go on for hours about the low levels, and I would prefer not to.
I mean, that brings up to me like the biggest concern about dumping radar out of the Model 3, and that is I've been living in Maine where the weather is terrible a lot of the year, and I worry about camera-only systems in terms of bad weather performance. Although I will say I've had the radar sensor get blocked by snow in my car too. The thing that makes me nervous, and in my upcoming staff car update about owning a Tesla, Tesla uses camera-based rain sensors to determine the auto wipers instead of other forms of rain sensors, and they are objectively awful. like awful in a way that really warrants the kind of obscenities that would get us demonetized. Tesla's auto moisture sensing wipers are the worst I've ever used in any car I've ever owned. And I've owned quite a number of cars with rain sensing wipers now. And that just makes me nervous about what its cameras are going to be like in bad weather. Also, I found that my cameras get obscured by road salt and grit very easily. Not just the rear camera, which gets blocked in the winter by just road grime within 5 minutes driving, but also the side quarter cameras also get obscured very quickly and easily. And now you're talking about taking 3 out of your 8 cameras out of the picture. That's a little uncomfortable making. I mean, you still have your ultrasonic sensors, but their range is very, very limited. Again, I'm optimistic. I like, there's a lot I don't like about the company, but I really like the Model 3. And I say that as someone who's not even a big sedan person. I really want Tesla to build something more of the form factor of Bolt. And the Y doesn't count. It doesn't. The Y is not a true hatchback in my mind.
Talking about the IDX, right?
I mean, the IDX would rock. I think, except that I'm very dubious about its infotainment. And I've gotten very used to the Tesla's infotainment, which works for most of my needs. It works well. I'm optimistic about the camera-based system being very good in optimal conditions. I am very dubious about the idea of it being able to operate independent of a human, because I just think that without other systems, feeding information, you start to lose 1 or 2 cameras due to, circumstances. And the idea of having a robo-taxi someone in a Tesla forums who also lives in Maine said to me the other day, like, driving a Model 3 in Maine for a couple of years really brings home the point that this was a car designed for Southern California, or rather for California in general. This is a problem with a lot of EVs. This was a problem with my Kona Electric. The version of the Kona Electric I had was clearly designed for sale in California, and they left out features that they offered in Canada in America that year because they figured, people in California go buy it, not people in cold weather. My hope from this change is that my user experience of autopilot will be better than it has been, as the software continues to update and the learning algorithms continue to update, and maybe I won't miss the radar. But I just don't imagine this getting, with just 8 cameras and 12 ultrasonic sensors, full autonomy just seems, independent of a driver, it just seems like a pipe dream to me.
Do we think that the amount of data... Okay, let's talk about data, because I know that you can answer some pretty specific bandwidth concerns that I have.
I also wanted to touch on the camera thing too, because I think from a product standpoint, it's good to think about, okay, what is actually being sold here? Are you being sold a car with self-driving capabilities, or are you being sold a self-driving car, right? And it's really important to think that way, because if you look at other adjacent technologies that are using cameras, like Comma AI is are you familiar with it at all?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So for those in the chat that might have heard of them or have not heard of them, they basically are trying to use mobile phones and tapping into the existing hardware of existing cars to give them self-driving capabilities. And they only use cameras. But they also don't market themselves as this will make your car always 100% self-driving. They acknowledge that it won't work in certain conditions, like rainy conditions, and when it can't see the ground, as like if you're running in an unmarked ground, it'll kick you out of self-driving. A bunch of other things that it has that they really kind of make you know about that. And I think it's really important that if you're removing a bunch of these technologies, and we're looking at sensor fusion as like a concept that really makes a vehicle run by itself, then you're really buying a car that has a feature, not a feature that is a car. So it's it's really important because expectations getting set kind of at the very beginning it's really hard to change those expectations later. And I think that they might have shot themselves in the foot in that regard. And I don't want to necessarily set the precedent with chat and with you guys that I think that that's not a possibility. I definitely feel like you can make self-driving with only cameras. I just don't think you could do it full self-driving all the time.
So a couple of questions here, and they're kind of connected. So I'm going to kind of spit them out at the same point. The first one is, I presume that visual sensors create a lot more data than a LiDAR or a radar-based system would, because you're capturing a much higher data rate, I would assume, from the camera because of all of the information relating to how bright each part of the sensor is, what colors are being hit, what colors are triggering, and all of that. But the other thing is, let's not forget that self-driving was first teased, I believe, in 2017 at the Tesla dual motor event. So when Tesla unveiled its dual motor Model S and Model X, dual motor Model S, that's when it said, oh, we've also got this thing that will let you drive, the car will drive itself. 2017. I've got the copy of the video B-roll on the server here. And the other thing I want to throw in here is, there's been several points in history where Tesla's gone, this car will be capable of full self-driving, and then backtracked and gone, actually, you need a hardware upgrade to your vehicle to make it capable of doing X, Y, and Z. I'm hoping that now Tesla's designing its own chipsets, and someone said Tesla's not fabbing it, it's contracting out to someone to fab them, but it's doing it to Tesla's design, just like Apple does, just like all the other big companies do. But I'm curious to know if the increased reliance on visual sensors would increase the throughput, and if that is likely going to need a bigger processor, and what that means for cloud connectivity and data requirements for storing all of this information, because Tesla's AI is cloud-based.
Right. Okay, so that is a really great, this is also a really good segue into two topics. I'm going to try to stack them in the right way. So I can't necessarily speak for all of Tesla's reasons here, but I can tell you from a technical standpoint that video is way easier to handle, and processes around video have been around for a very long time. So getting video off of systems, moving targets, static targets, over cellular networks, it's been around for decades. My focus has always been around LiDAR because it's been hard. And my fun fact about self-driving vehicles, and this is a generalization, and it is relatively well published, so I'm not saying anything out of turn here. In 8 hours of driving, a self-driving vehicle with a full sensor suite will generate around 10 terabytes of data. Okay, now we're going to scale that up to 100,000 vehicles on the road. Now you can see where the problem lies, right? There isn't enough hard drives in the planet to store data streaming like that all the time and storing it places. So the real kind of like golden egg here that companies are going after is slices of information that we're going to pull out from specific events that we care about to then build our models on top of. And so sampling the data is going to be way more important, and then throwing away the data that isn't important, because it's just not feasible to collect all that much data. When I was working for that semi-truck company, we had a multi-petabyte on-prem storage that would have been full in 30 days.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. That is the level in which you have to collect data for government to be, like, the government right now wants you to collect that data. Businesses want to collect that data because they need to prove that their system works. And it's just a really big problem to solve. So video is actually the easy part. smart sensors that just give off text-based information like GPS and all that other fun stuff, those are really easy to handle. It's the big players like LiDAR sensors, which the VLS 128, which is Velodyne's largest sensor at the moment. It's a 128 channel sensor. I have looking over at my notes over here because I have so many different data rates. It does 40 megabytes per second. And if you go and look at any of the really horrendous self-driving rigs that are set up with these like metal bars and everything sticking off the top of it, imagine, if you will, that each one of those cost somewhere north of $10,000 depending on the resolution that they're going for, and that each one of them generates about 30 plus megabytes per second, and that they're all stored in one central place, and that they all care about that data. You know, the equivalency 4K camera, you can have a variable data rate. You can compress it, you can send it. That's not something you can really do with LiDAR at the moment. So first one that comes off to mind is like FFmpeg or like MPEG compression. And you have with LiDAR, the latest trend right now for compressing data is through Qualcomm, one of Qualcomm's initiatives. It is MPEG PCC, which is point cloud compression. So it'll make a scan, it'll create a point cloud, you compress the point cloud and send it off, and it's pretty much magic. And then there's also the Draco compression algorithm, but it isn't necessarily tied towards point clouds, but it's 3D geometry. And there's a bunch of different ways you can kind of leverage that, but it all slows down the process substantially. And so a lot of these companies, if they're trying to grab it out of thin air and they need it like right now, they don't compress the data. And that's a substantial amount of data to stream. So they only care about the things that they care about. So these vehicles have event-based automation. An event happens, it sees a thing, it interacts with an item, whatever that event may be, then triggers the offload of the data or triggers the saving of the data, or they just store all of it and sift through it later.
That is epic, the amount of data storage and stuff that we need to that you have, and the selective intelligent, as someone said in the chat room, neural nets can help with that because they can identify what's important or what's not important.
Correct.
So in closing, I think it sounds as if we are optimistic about the shift to visual sensors for the most part. We do have some concerns about the efficacy of the car in certain features without radar, right, Winter?
Yeah, and I think, to me, I don't even have as many concerns about, it's not even, my dominant thing isn't even my concerns about the efficacy, although I will say, coming from a BMW i3, I'm very conscious of the way that, like, bright sunlight at sunset and sunrise would screw up the adaptive cruise. That was a camera-based system. To me, I don't think Tesla would do this if they didn't think that the camera-only system could meet the requirements of the users at the moment, as the users currently use the system. But I am not the most trusting sort when it comes to corporations, and I don't entirely believe that this is the next logical evolution of autonomy. I think this may very well be Tesla saying, hey, we can't get radar systems right now, but I bet you, at least on a lower end cars, we can make this work just with the cameras. And that's where I come from. Like, I've had this conversation with other Tesla owners, that there are decisions the company makes that I think are sometimes in the interest of the company's bottom line, not always in the interest of the best user experience. That's not a Tesla thing. That's a big companies who don't love you thing. And I'm a big believer that big companies don't love me. Full stop. So yeah, my best case scenario is this improves my user experience. My middling scenario, where I'm sort of pinning most of my hopes, is that it doesn't change anything. But I'm also conscious of the fact that things might not be as good for a bit. It was pointed out that when Tesla and Mobileye's relationship ended, the autopilot version 2 after Tesla and Mobileye split took quite a while to get back to what autopilot had been prior to that separation.
Yeah.
And I would be, especially given that this is rolling out for new cars without some of the features that it had back when it was a radar and camera system, I won't be shocked if it takes a bit for the new camera-only systems to catch up to where camera and radar systems were.
And I think this system is ultimately going to be better than none. And we're going to be moving forwards. The biggest bugbear I have is the way that Tesla is using its customers to beta test a product. I am against that, although I'm also a hypocrite because that's exactly what I'm doing right now. Hand on heart, be honest moment. I am a beta tester for Starlink. And there's nothing different between me beta testing Starlink and someone beta testing autopilot. The difference obviously being is that unless something was terrible to happen to my Dishy, unless I'm very much mistaken, Dishy is not capable of killing anybody.
Right, the stakes are not quite as high.
The stakes are not quite as high, but I am still beta testing for a company, so I can't really criticize Tesla for that. And as long as the people who are beta testing the product are beta testing it appropriately, I think we're good. As far as I am aware, Tesla is weeding out people who are abusing the system and are abusing the system and doing stuff with it they shouldn't, are being removed from the program.
We're definitely seeing that with the full self-driving beta.
Yeah.
I have no problem with the full self-driving beta.
What was it? The guy that I just saw a headline once, and it was the guy who slept in the back of his Tesla, got out of court on bail, bought a Tesla, and did it again.
Yeah,
like almost immediately.
He's not a.
It's like that is. That's just great for your community, man. Like,
yeah, and it's always the idiots who spoil it for everybody else. And I think that's 100%. True whether you're talking about people who are using autopilot safely. Most people are. There's just a few people who are abusing it and using it dangerously. My concern is that the few will spoil it for the whole, which is one of the reasons why I've always been someone who would rather see frameworks in place before we see the technology on the road, because then it's much easier for legislators to go, no, this car is definitely doing everything we asked it to do, and the person is the person at fault. And I think that's ultimately where I come down. I want to see Tesla work more with legislators to actually get its technology set up as a standard, if that's what it has to be. If Tesla is going to be the pioneer of these vision-based systems, then
no money in that. There's no money in them working. Like, I'm not saying they shouldn't. And to be honest,
no, you're right.
Other Blue Cruise, Cruise, ProPilot, I see them all get together. And
they should totally do that.
But they're not going to.
No, they're not going to.
No company says, please add more regulation on top of our business model. That's all that.
Bingo. I was going to say there's from a business perspective, regulation is not the nicest thing in the world. From a consumer protection, it totally is. However, that make hay while the sun shines kind of thing. Like they know there's going to be regulation. Everybody in the industry knows it's going to happen. And it is a very Silicon Valley thing to do everything in your power outside of the rules while you can, so that you can learn everything you possibly can about how you can make it cheaper, more affordable, and more efficient without being obstructed. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I think what I'm most bitter about, I'm just going to come out and say it, is that the US government right now regulates drones, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I am filming, so we don't own a drone. We don't own a drone because in order for one of our team to have a drone and to go out and fly while we are filming a car review, so we get all those really beautiful, car driving down the road overhead shots, we would have to take a commercial drone pilot's license. We would have to regularly renew it, and only the person with the drone license would fly, and they would have to be in certain, there are so many restrictions about drone pilots. And even people who are not, that's if you're filming for a business, even if you're filming privately for your own personal use, you still have to there has to be regulations about certain size drones, whether they're registered or not. If we are legislating about drones, which have just as beneficial use in real world applications as self-driving cars, we really should be treating them with a little bit more
Similar, yeah, I think, and I don't think it's very far away. And I think that's why you're seeing this really big ramp up in people taking advantage of it while they can. You saw, I don't want to like segue this around to non-topic items, but you saw the same thing happen with cryptocurrency. There's a bunch of things happened. Like there was this massive balloon up of people doing things with cryptocurrency, and then the kibosh came down and it all just stopped and started again because everyone was trying to do what they could possibly do while they could do it before that hammer fell. And it will eventually come to the automotive industry with regards to this. There's no question in my mind. Just a matter of when. It'll eventually happen.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Adam. I really appreciate that you've given up an hour of your time, a little bit more than an hour of your time, to join us. I had a really good discussion, had a really fun discussion. I think the chat room enjoyed that as well. So thank you very much. I'm hoping that we can get you back in the future to talk more autonomous vehicle and sensor fusion stuff if you would be willing.
Oh, sure thing. I've been a fan for quite some time, so I'm always happy to pop on and say hi.
Thank you. Yeah, I know you pinged me the other day with a photo of someone testing a Lidar system, and I'm like, and I knew that when you sent me that photograph, we had to get you on to talk about it. So thank you for that. Winter, it's been fun, hasn't it?
It absolutely has been. Always.
It has been fun. Before we go, I do want to throw out, there is a short that's just about to go up about the Chevrolet Bolt EV, the battery upgrade. Just an update. Winter is still waiting on his buyback offer. And we've booked both my wife's Chevrolet Bolt, who's sitting behind me, and my Chevrolet Bolt are both going in for the software update on Friday. So hopefully we'll be able to cover that on a future episode of the show. A bit of housekeeping in this coming weekend. We are going to be taking a little bit of a break. We've got the Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully we should have some content for you all to enjoy, and then we'll be back to normal. Thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. I know that when we had some issues with the YouTube algorithm causing us headaches, lots of people have been reaching out and saying they are no longer subscribed or they have no longer had the bell activated. I think there was probably a software glitch at YouTube's side that was unsubscribing people and unnotifying. So if you think you are not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you don't miss out on our next episodes. We've also got Transport Evolved Take 2, which we're going to start putting more videos out on, including the excellent video explaining why Winter now sounds like he's from the UK. And we also have Transport Evolved Shorts, which is where we have our little bite-sized sub 60-second delps into the world of cleaner, greener, safer, and smarter vehicles. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget to support us through Patreon, Bitcoin, and Ko-fi. And I'll be back tomorrow with more great content. Keep evolving. Thank you very much. That was fun. I was just waiting for the end of